Blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. And it's a great honor to have as my guest Father Timothy Hojnicki from Pennsylvania, part of the world that I know fairly well. I used to live there. And I don't know Father Hojnicki in the real world. He's one of the friends that I've made on Facebook. And I have several Orthodox priests, Catholic priests as well, on Facebook that I've gotten to know. But in particular, what I find really interesting about Father Hojnicki is that you often share pictures of you and your family. I've been really edified by that because Father, as someone who was born and raised, I don't know about raised, but born certainly a Roman Catholic, the married priesthood is something that is very foreign to me. And I think a number of people, especially those who are Roman Catholic, sort of misunderstand it or don't really understand what the married priesthood is. So could you tell me a little bit? One of the things, let's start here. This is how I thought I would start. Is it one of your posts on Facebook? I think it was a couple of months ago. You pictured, I don't know if it was your childhood home or your grandmother's home, and it was for sale. Do you remember that post,
Yeah.
Father? Okay. And you had mentioned in that post, because I read it and everything, that you as a boy would play church in this home. So you had a call. I mean, it sounds like from a very early age to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
priesthood.
It's really interesting. Well, first off, thank you, Joseph, for the invitation to come in and talk about this. I think it's good that if there's something we're not familiar with, to kind of, orient ourselves with it and learn more about it. So, thank you for, the invitation to come and talk on your podcast. I joke. I said I went to Catholic school for 12 years as a kid, so I speak Roman Catholic fluently, even though I was born and raised Orthodox. Um, And this topic of married clergy is an interesting thing. I believe it was kind of instituted in the West in the 1100s. So it's a late development. But really, the reason why there's a celibate clergy in the West is the same reason why we have celibate episcopacy in the East. I mean, for a good reason, that they would focus all their time and attention on their spiritual flock. And that's why our bishops are all celibate. So they would focus on their diocese, having more than one parish and priest in charge that they're in charge of. But for the priesthood, everyone says it's great to have married clergy. It's great, but it's hard to balance those two worlds. That I'm father to my parish, and I'm dad and husband to my family, and trying to balance all those things is a juggle sometimes. But I think it's a good balancing act, right? Um, and so, yeah, I mean, to answer your first question, my father is a retired battalion chief for the city of Wilmington, the fire department. My grandfather retired captain from the city of Wilmington Fire Department, Wilmington, Delaware. I never wanted to be a firefighter. I never wanted to be an astronaut. I never wanted to be a cowboy. None of this stuff. I always wanted to be a priest.
Wow.
And so my grandmother said, "Oh, it's just a phase he's going through." Well, I'm 42 now. I'm still in that phase. I never got out of it. I used to play church in her side bedroom. There's a little table that I would set up with a little gospel book and a cross, and I had little vestments made, and a little string with bells on it. That was my little censer, and
That's
and
pretty
I used to
awesome.
play church from the time I was 3 years old. And
Wow.
so a lot of times people have that story of when they got the call, they felt God is calling them this moment. I was always kind of like self-conscious because I never felt I had that experience. I just always wanted to be a priest. As far as I can remember, that's what I wanted to be. Um, and yeah, and it's this they say, if you love the job that you're doing, you'll never have to work a day in your life. And that resonates with me as a priest because serving in the church and going visit the sick and counseling with people and talking to people, just interacting with people. I love it. It doesn't get old. I still have butterflies, every time I stand in front of the altar to get ready to serve a liturgy. And after, 17 and a half years of priesthood, it's always like a new thing. It's been something that's been part of my life from the beginning. As far as I can remember, I wanted to be a priest and serve the church. Now, as a kid, you see the priest dressed up in brocade and swinging the censer and open the doors and the icons, and as a kid, that's what you see, the neat part of it. And I was 16 years old, and a good friend of ours in my parish, back in Wilmington, Delaware, had some kind of heart surgery. And my father had said, after church, let's go and visit him in the hospital. I said, hospital? There's sick people in the hospital. I don't want to go to a hospital. He said, well, what kind of priest are you going to be if you don't go to a hospital? I thought, well, that's a really good point. I got to do that. And so after liturgy, we brought up Prosphora, we went to the hospital, said a prayer with him. We were maybe there 15 minutes, maybe. He passed away a few years ago, but every time I would see him when I went home, he would mention that visit. And I talk about that experience as being something that shifted my thinking about the priesthood wasn't just about dressing up in brocade and and doing the services. That's the easy part. That's the fun part. The more difficult part is meeting with people in their difficulties and bearing the burdens of the people that I'm responsible for, whether it be their sins in confession or their physical or spiritual, emotional, mental ailments. That they come to me all the time to share these things with me. And my responsibility to them as father is to hear those things, is to talk about those things, to kind of deal with them just like I would go to my father. My father to this day is one of my best friends. He's not my buddy, but he's one of my best friends. And I can go to my father and say, here's what I'm struggling with, here's my difficulties. And sometimes my dad will put me in my place, like, well, here's what you're not seeing or whatever. Or other times he comforts me. And so that's the model, I think, of my priesthood is my father, how he dealt with me growing up. He wasn't overly strict, but he wasn't overly passive either. It was kind of a middle ground. And so I've kind of modeled that with my priesthood to my people and to my children, being that place where I want someone to be able to come to me with anything, no matter what it is, without any sense of judgment or fear. But at the same time, having a balance where if it's something difficult they have to hear, they'll let me say it and they'll hear it, with charity. In a nutshell, that's kind of how I see my vocation and my priesthood. We were very blessed when I was in seminary. I served at the parish in Oliphant, Pennsylvania for 5 months, my last semester in school. They were without a priest. And so the bishop sent me there just on weekends to kind of learn the ropes kind of thing. It was a wonderful parish my mother had grew up in, so I knew the people a little bit, but it wasn't like a compromise thing because I was a kid at the time. But so I would serve there on the weekends, and then when I graduated, I was sent to Mechanicsburg, which was a mission parish. It was just started from the larger church in Harrisburg, Christ the Savior, that had been established a year before, and then I was sent there in June of 2005, and I've been there ever since. And we took it from 40 people when I got there. Now we have about 190 people on the books. Last Sunday we had 173 for liturgy. We built a new building. We have 13 acres of land that over this past 17 years we've been kind of working this together to make a beautiful community that this is kind of the Orthodox faith can be expressed in this area, in that place.
If you build it, they will come. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I was taking notes while you were speaking, Father.
Sure.
You said a lot there that rung bells in my head. You talked about being joyful in your vocation, and that's something that I've experienced as well from my observation of Orthodox priests. They seem to be really happy. I know people hate that word happy, but they seem to be pretty content and at peace. Now I don't know,
Well, I mean,
everything. I don't know what's background, but
it's not probably the way across the board. I mean, I know some priests that are miserable, that have difficult lives, and that it's a mixed bag, right?
Yeah,
But I also know people that have very difficult lives that are still joyful, right? And that's the difference.
exactly.
Happy and joy, I think, are two different things. And that's one of my professors in seminary drilled that into our heads, that it's not about, we're not supposed to be happy, we're supposed to be joyful.
That's it,
Um,
Father.
yeah, and I think that's what I try to do, that you can be joyful even in difficulty. The scripture talk about that, rejoice even in adversity.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that part of it is our disposition. Father Alexander Schmemann of blessed memory, who was a pretty big figure in the Orthodox Church in America in the last, he died in 1983, but he was really one of the ones who was pushing that, we got to get back to where we came from as a church, frequent participation in the Eucharist, understanding why we do what we do. And
Yeah.
one of the things that he would say is the crux of our spiritual lives is, how do you deal with what you've been dealt, right? Not we don't. There's a lot of things we don't choose in life. I didn't choose my parents. I didn't choose where I was going to be born. I didn't choose a lot of things. But what do you do with what you've been given? And some people can become miserable because of it, and all kinds of nastiness. And other people can rise above it and be joyful in the midst of it. And I think that's the where the rubber meets the road in our Christianity. No matter what we're given, good or bad, what do we do with it? I mean, I could have a bad experience and blame God and my parents and this person and not my boss and whatever, and excuse myself.
Yeah.
But in the church, we acknowledge our own sin, right? But without despair, we turn to Christ and say, "Okay, here I am, Lord, help me," right? And through that, through a life of repentance, our heart is changed. We become more transparent to Him, and all these difficult things that can come upon us. Those are the crosses that we carry daily, that we work our salvation, going forward. So I think it's a different perspective than in the West, that we look at how the spiritual life is supposed to be, rather than just doing this thing and then this happens. It's not like that. It's not mechanical. It's more organic.
Yeah.
Just like life is organic, right? It has to happen naturally, and it takes time and effort and energy. And I think in the spiritual life, at that level, there's no miracle, right? There's just real work that has to be done. And a lot of it's done within the context of our own heart. And many people, don't appreciate Orthodox Christianity for that reason, because it's hard. There's hard work. We don't have spectator sports in the Orthodox Church. You're involved in this. Your participation is part of it. And that's why we baptize children so young, that they're raised in this, to learn this, to kind of condition themselves this, so that when they're able to kind of have that independence as an adult or a teenager, that they can like take the reins and deal with the stuff of of our lives in a proper context within the life of the church. That's, I think, the kind of the ethos of the church as we're looking at how we're supposed to do this.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard.
I agree. Yeah, I hear you, Father. That's a particular battle of mine, is not to get mired in kind of a swamp of self-pity. So yeah, that's tough. And one of the things too, on this joyful aspect of the priesthood that that you mentioned, is that in Roman Catholicism, it's been difficult for me, because I have become good friends with a number of priests, and I've seen it, especially over the last few years, that a sort of heavy heart has descended upon a lot of them, and I don't necessarily believe it all to do with the sex abuse crisis, but a lot of Catholic priests at this point are struggling,
Sure.
and
And I'll say too that
heart
when
goes
I
out
was
to
in high
them.
school, some of the greatest influences on my vocation were Roman Catholic priests at my high school. They were Oblates of St. Francis de Sales. I went to an all-boys Catholic school in Wilmington, Delaware, Salesianum. And it was a time where in my own parish, we had some difficulties with priests and parish council and that kind of thing. A lot of strain in the parish, differing opinions, egos, that kind of thing. And as a young man, like seeing this, like it was, kind of disconcerting that, there's all this turmoil in the church. which now I know that turmoil in the church has proves that it's the truth because the devil's trying to mess everything up. If everything's peaceful, the devil leaves it alone because he's already has what he wants. But if there's turmoil, he's trying to stir things up and stop, the work of God being done. And so it was at that time that those several Roman Catholic priests were, my pastors at that time that really I saw the joyful personalities that they saw in their particular vocation as teachers, and were a big help to me at that time.
Mm.
But it's interesting that going back to the topic at hand, I have several Roman Catholic priests in the area I'm very friendly with. We get together for lunch and coffee, and they come to our services. I'll sit in on a mass or something to kind of support them, whatever. I don't serve, obviously, but I'll just be present. And it's interesting that this topic of or this idea that we call priest father, which a lot of times Protestants say to me, "I like to call you father." I'm like, well, you don't have to if you're not my spiritual child. It's like it's a term of endearment, not a technical. You have to call me this. Call whatever you want. Who cares? But they call the priest father because he has that role as father.
Right.
And what's happened in the last couple of years, especially in the West, is that you have these gigantic parishes. I mean, one of our parishes locally has more people in it on the books than our entire diocese, our Orthodox diocese in Eastern Pennsylvania. There's just like the thousands of people.
A
Now,
lot
how
of
many people actually come, I don't know. But there's two priests dealing with thousands of people. Well, my question to that is like, how can you call yourself father if you don't know your children?
yeah.
Uh, and so, if you look at Orthodox parishes, by and large, most of them are smaller parishes that and when you think about it, 100, 200 people are about as many people I can keep tabs on as an effective father. But in my community right now, I know who all my parishioners are. I know where they work. I know where their kids go to school. I know, if they have football games, I'll go to the football game. They have plays, I'll go to the play. I know who they're dating. I met the girlfriend or boyfriend, and so there's as a father, I know my people, and if it gets so big that you don't know them, you're just number 32 or something. I think we betray that calling as father. In the Orthodox, at least in the Slavic understanding, the priest is batushka, the wife is matushka. So like little father, little mother, and his spiritual children. It's all in the context of a family. Um, but it also comes with sometimes dad has to lay down the law.
Yeah.
There's been times at the end of liturgy, we have live feed in our services, and sometimes if there's an issue in church that isn't really for public consumption, I'll tell my son turn off the camera, and I
Mhm.
address my parish. Like we had a situation once where some of the kids were leaving like their food at coffee hour in the classrooms and weren't cleaning up, and I'd address the parents like you have to take care of cleaning up your kid's mess kind of thing. And so it was my job to kind of be dad and say, all right, this is what needs to be done. And so I think that role is necessary. But if you don't have a relationship with the person, how does that get accomplished? And I see this in an interesting way. In the Orthodox Church, I'm known as Father Timothy. I kind of laugh when you said Father Hojnicki. But in the West, they always call the priest by his last name. It's very formal. In the Orthodox Church, I'm rarely called Father Hojnicki by anybody in my parish. I'm Father Timothy or Father Tim because they just know me in a more personal way. And so if you know the person in that intimate sense, you can use your first name, right? We're on a first name basis. I know who these people are. They know who I am, rather than just something formal, like, Father Hojnicki, as if, like this kind of, I signed my letters or something that way.
That's the
Uh,
way I was raised. Yeah.
of course, yeah. But I think it goes back to that thing where you have thousands of people and one or two priests, you don't really know him well, so you're formal with him because you don't know him.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's these little nuances that happen that it's the same idea, but the kind of experience of it is different in the context of a married clergy who understands family. Um, One of my priest friends, he was kind of joking with me once. In the Catholic priesthood, he said, we're always getting invited to this dinner, this party, this, everything else. It's wonderful. It's great. And I said, yeah, it sounds like a ball. I said, but what do you do when you go home and there was no one there? And I felt bad because after I said it, it looked like I punched him in the gut. He just went, ugh. And I come
True.
home and I have my wife and my kids, and my kids are like organic entertainment. I mean, they're always something funny to laugh at or going on, or we do something as a family. But as bad as my day can be, and I can deal with some difficult things as a priest, like I said, 17 years, I've seen and experienced just about everything, and some things not good, right? There's real life happens. But I can come home to a loving wife and supporting kids, and have that comfort that if I just came home to an empty house, I don't know what I would do, which I think is a reason why there's a high level of alcohol abuse in some places, because they have to deal with it somehow.
Yep.
And which is sad, but it's I can understand why it goes that way.
Yeah, and overeating and depression, and there's a lot of different problems.
There's all kinds of studies done on this kind of thing. It's really sad. I mean, I'm not just speculating. I mean, I've read some studies about this,
I have
and
too,
where,
Father.
how do you process these things in a good way? Um,
Yeah, it hasn't been handled well. I know a number. I don't want to go down this avenue, but I
sure.
know a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot. I know a number of Roman Catholic priests that have had issues with depression and things. And my heart goes out to them because there really is not a support network for priests, Roman Catholic priests who are struggling, because a lot of times they are alone in a parish or with one other priest, and there just isn't that network for them, and
That's the
things.
understanding that God did not create us to be alone. God exists in Trinity. Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit exists in a Trinity, a unity, and a community from all ages.
Father, I'm there with you.
And when God decided to create that which was not God, us, it was with the express purpose to love something other than themselves in this fullness. And
Mm,
so we are created to be in a community. That's why even in monasteries or whatever, there's a community there, right? You're never by yourself.
that's
There's
right.
a there's
That's
an
right.
Orthodox proverb says the only place you can go by yourself is hell.
You hit
If
it.
you reject the love of and the community of everyone else, we're saved as a community. And I think that in that process, we're helping each other towards salvation in that role of community.
Boom.
There's
Yep.
also why when we have liturgies, generally speaking, in Orthodox churches, there's one liturgy on a Sunday. Now,
Yep.
sometimes you have bigger churches that might have an ethnic community. They'll have like a Russian liturgy first and an English one second, whatever. But generally speaking, most parishes, you have one liturgy on a Sunday where everyone is together. That as we celebrate the Eucharist, we are united as the body of Christ, as the church. And there's this corporate understanding of us together worshiping, not individuals or not, by ourselves, but together we come together as the church.
Yeah, Father. I wasn't going to bring up this topic yet, but you mentioned it, so I will. And that's the availability of Orthodox priests versus Roman Catholic priests. I don't mean to keep bringing up the Roman Catholic Church, my intention is not to bash it, but that's where my experience is coming from. So as somebody I was a hardcore Roman Catholic for 22 years. So I mean, I wasn't just a Sunday Catholic. I was pretty involved.
Sure.
And one of the first things that I did notice when I got to know Orthodox priests was that they were and I wasn't even Orthodox at the time. They were much more available in terms of time than Roman Catholic priests. And I was like, well, this kind of it goes against the argument that a lot of Roman Catholics use against the married priesthood, which is, well, a married priest doesn't have time. And I wanted to mention that because I hear this. This was an oft quoted passage from the Bible that I heard a lot as a Roman Catholic against the married priesthood, and it's the famous quote from Paul, the first letter to the Corinthians. I think it's chapter 7, around there. The unmarried man is anxious about the affairs of the Lord, how to please the Lord, but the married man is anxious about worldly affairs, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. I'm not going to comment on Paul, but I mean, Paul, of course, was a bachelor.
Right.
And
You consider his experience.
yeah, but I have found that um, despite that argument being used, that a married priest, his time is divided, and he's not going to have time for the flock. I've actually found the opposite to be true.
Yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned the demographics of that Catholic churches are much larger in terms of people, and that is true, Father, right? Because I go to a ROCOR parish, and compared to the parishes in Catholicism that I were in, it's relativing small.
I think
But
that two
but
words
oh,
sum it
okay,
up:
go ahead,
time
Father.
management. I mean, because like I told you today, I had to postpone this Zoom call because my son had his first day in kindergarten, so we had to drop him off at the bus stop, and I took my wife out to lunch. I
Oh,
mean, so I kind of balanced that. And there's some days where last week ago we had the orientation at my kid's high school, so I went and took them and did the walk through the high school one night. I had to postpone my parish council meeting because I did, so you balance everything. And I mean, I'm not sitting here saying I've done it perfectly. There
no.
are times I mess it up terribly, or I miss something. The kids have a recital and I had this going on and I didn't balance it well, or I'd asked to bless a house. It's the same day it was this person's, dance recital. So I think that there's always a level of juggling that needs to be done. But what I try to do is meet with my wife, regularly with our calendars. Okay, what's happening this week? Well, I have church this day. I have a meeting this day. Kids have this. Can we move this around? Can you drop this one off and pick this one up? And if you pick him up, can you take him to church with you? He'll do his homework in your office. You can do your thing. So I mean, it can be done. And I think that what Paul's talking there, you mentioned. I think he's speaking from his own experience. In general, yeah, someone who's married is going to be, his time's going to be divided with worldly things, whatever else. But it's one thing if I'm worried about like secular worldly things or the things of my family, right? Which I see as part of my life as a priest and the life of the church because it's what part of what God has given me. I was married before I was ordained. And so, I don't think that is separate as from the church. I think it's part of my vocation as a husband and father,
Yeah.
also my vocation as a priest. So it's another thing that Father Alexander Schmemann said so well is when he was asked one time, if you had to sum up orthodoxy in one word, what would you say? And he said, sanity or balance.
Hmm.
Right? That everything is balanced. We don't go so far this way or so far this way. We stay right in the middle.
I
And the
agree.
world seems to always go to one extreme or the other extreme, and the church just stays right down the middle of the road. Every road has two gutters on either side. We stay right,
Right.
and I think that's the thing that we do. And so my goal, I think, as a husband and a father and a priest, is to stay in the middle of the road. How do I balance all those things? Now, there's some things that we've kind of understood as a family that I don't compromise. If the kids have something on Sunday morning, they don't go to it. They go to church.
Wow.
Like that's the rule. That was my father's rule to us when I first was 15 years old and got a job as a stock boy at a Walgreens. It was actually called Happy Harry's. It was a local Delaware kind of drugstore that Walgreens took over now. But he said when you went in and you got your interview and you got the job, first thing I had to tell the manager was I don't work on Sunday mornings. I said I can't tell him that. He says you will tell him that. You're not working Sunday mornings. Noon on you can work, but Sunday morning you have to go to church. You know, as a kid, I wouldn't even dare ask my father if I could spend the night at someone's house Saturday night. Just I knew the answer was no, because we know that church was number one important. And so there's certain things that we didn't compromise on, and so that I've instilled that in my children.
Right.
So if they have a school event Sunday morning, God forbid, they don't go to it because the liturgy is the thing that we do as a family on Sundays. Now, my kids, one of my greatest joys is that my kids love church. I don't force them to go to things. My daughter's in the choir. My two oldest boys are in the altar. Jojo's not old enough yet, so he's still with my wife. But eventually, next year, he'll get there too. They like going to church. They like being part of it. My boys come with me first thing in the morning Sunday and light the candles and set things up, get the breads ready as
That's
I'm getting my
amazing.
stuff ready. And they enjoy it. And so it's not a forced thing. So when Lent comes around, we have a lot of services. Lent is like, the normal year on steroids. It's just that much more, services every other day.
I
Um,
know.
And so we had a situation where one of my son's friends asked him to have a sleepover on a Friday night during Lent, and they were kind of nervous. Do I ask Dad? What's he going to say? And I thought, you know what? They've come to every other service we have. I'm going to let him go with his friends this one time, right? That there is a little bit of flexibility there. That I'm not going to be so rigid that they resent because Dad didn't do anything. They came to everything. To give them one night to just relax, you know. And it's kind of what the Desert Fathers talked about a reed that blows with the wind. If it's
Right.
too rigid, it'll snap. And now I don't let them do it all the time, but every so often I allow that kind of thing to give a little bit of flexibility. And I think that gets that balance of church life and home life. It's not easy, and I can't say I've perfected it, but so far my kids don't resent the church. That's the one problem I think with a married clergy is sometimes that the family lives in a fishbowl,
Yeah.
and people are that much more critical of the family.
Yeah.
And then kids start to resent the church because they see how their father was treated. And
Yeah.
then there's a whole group of, I mean, there's a study on this too, of the children of priests who grow up and leave the church completely because they're resentful of the church because it took their father from them. So I
Yeah.
think it could be done poorly, and that could be the end result too. But like anything else, the pendulum can go both ways. We have to stay right in the middle. And so we're trying to navigate that right now with them and kind of give them their freedom, but at the same time, give them a vision of how it's supposed to be. So far, so good.
You said a lot there, Father. It sounds like um, it sounds like also there's in order for it in order for the married priesthood to work, it's a partnership as well. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, between the priest and his wife. I mean, she
Absolutely.
needs, yeah. If they aren't working together
It won't
for the,
work.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
that's what it sounds like.
we have a saying that, if the wife's not on board, it's not going to work. Like she can make or break a priesthood. And because there's a lot expected of her. I'm the one that gets walked around the altar and invested and ordained, but she goes with me. One of our metropolitans, Leonti, who died in 1965, he was a married priest. His wife had died, and then he became a bishop later.
Mm,
And he made the point one time that when the priest walks around the altar at his ordination, he takes his wife with him, right? That she goes with him through his marriage. And I always remember that I was married before I was ordained. That's not something, she's not apart from that. She's with it.
right.
My father-in-law and mother-in-law, they just celebrated 60 years of marriage and priesthood. And when we honored him for his 60th anniversary, we honored both of them because he does all the part you see, but she does all the stuff you don't see. And I tell people all the time, my wife is the one that shines me up and makes me look polished.
Wow.
That behind the scenes, making sure that everything is lined up, organized, and then I go out and be able to do what I'm doing. We had a funny situation a couple of years ago that my father-in-law had a knee replacement, and so my wife stayed there for an extra. We went down for vacation, stayed with him there, and I came home early because my vacation was up. And the week that I was by myself, my bulletin had typos. I missed an appointment. All the stuff I was supposed to. She usually keeps me in track. I said I can't do this without you. Um, so a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, I couldn't do this without her. It's just
That's
true.
all. That's
And so
awesome.
it's a blessing, but I think it's a vocation for her too. And
Yeah.
if the wife doesn't want to do it and the husband wants to do it, don't do it because it'll crash and burn. I've seen it sadly several times. Um,
So, Father, this is one of the reasons why the priest has to be married before he's ordained, correct, Father?
Yeah, because think about it. You don't want to have like the priest serving vespers, and then he's going out on a date afterwards. Like it would just be awkward. And so that needs to be taken care of before he's ordained, so then he can focus on his ministry and not worry about dating and everything else and the more worldly things that could be a temptation.
And
Uh,
and Father, were you married before you started seminary?
I was, let me go back here. So I started seminary in 2002. I got engaged the summer before I started. I got engaged July. I started seminary at the end of August. And then I got married the summer of my second year of seminary. So my third final year, I came back to school married. And so I was ordained in January, and I then ordained a deacon in October, a priest in January, and then sent to my parish in June. And I graduated in May and sent to parish in June. So yeah, I was married my third year at seminary, and then ordained.
And you went to St. Chicon's there in PA.
Yeah,
I got a little story, Father. So in 2018, I was really serious about wanting to be Orthodox.
yeah,
So I made a trip out to PA, and I had friends there because I used to live there. And I went to St. Chicon. I asked if I could go on a retreat, and they didn't know me from Adam, and I
yeah,
wasn't Orthodox. They treated me very, very well.
yeah.
Very gracious, wonderful people there.
They're good men there. The abbot and I graduated seminary together.
Oh wow,
The Surges. He's a great guy. He's done wonderful things in the last 17 years with the monastery. It's just a healthy place.
it is.
I think that's what monasteries are supposed to be. If a parish is a hospital, monasteries are the ICU, right? And so just to go for a couple of days just to get a recharge and be immersed in this whole different life of just daily services and prayer and a Christian atmosphere. That was so wonderful about seminary. As a kid, I'd always lament that after like Pascha, I'd have to go back to school, and most people was like a week or 2 weeks
Yeah,
behind us. People already forgot. The resurrection was in the rearview mirror, was over, and we're still seeing Christ is risen. And so I come to class, I'd say Christ is risen. People are like, that already happened. Like get on with it. And when I went to seminary, every class began and end with prayer. Christ is risen. The angel cried all day. We greet everyone. Christ is risen all day. And so that whole life of prayer I could participate in. One of the blessings of St. Tikhon's Seminary is that it's the monastery and seminary work side by side. And
right.
so we worship with the monastics that, we go to the monastery and kind of join their worship, to kind of learn the services and partake of the spiritual life of the monastery.
Across the street.
Right
Yeah,
across
yeah.
the street, yeah.
I got this bracelet. I wore it so
There
in
you go.
honor. And
Yeah,
do we call are there monks there, right? Is
yeah,
that what we call them? And
yep,
they're celibate.
yes, yep,
Okay.
yeah,
I ate with them and went to prayer with them. I did everything. It was
yeah,
awesome. And one of the things that struck me again about Orthodoxy, because I had heard about the standing and the very long liturgies, because in Roman Catholicism, depending the priest that you go to, you can have a 45-minute Sunday mass. So I had heard about it. I was like, man. So and you were just talking about Lent. So I had been going since 2018, I've been going kind of off and on to Orthodox liturgy, and then I go back to Roman Catholicism, mainly the TLM, the traditional Latin Mass. And when I decided to make the jump in and just say I'm going to go, it was during Lent, and it was intense.
sure.
But I figured if I can endure, I don't know what the right word is. If I can endure sounds like it's something bad, but if I can what's the word, Father? I don't know. If I can get through this, that sounds bad too.
Persevere.
Persevere, that's better. If I can persevere, I know. And the burden was light.
Sure.
I shouldn't say burden again because it sounds negative.
Well, that's our
But
Lord's word.
okay.
My yoke upon my burden is easy. My burden is light. I
that's
mean,
why that's why it came to mind.
yeah.
But the when a bad Catholic mass, it was 45 minutes, seemed like an eternity. But a 2 hour Orthodox liturgy was like, man, that went by really fast.
Well, that's the difficulty. I mean, I consider myself like a liturgics nerd. Like I love all the how things work and that kind of thing. And so growing up in Catholic school, we'd have to go to masses sometimes. And I'd see some of the more traditional things with like, incense and like, the adoration. I used to think was really interesting. And I can still remember tentum ergo sacramentum, right? But I mean, why I can remember some things in Latin, but I can't remember what I had for breakfast. Go figure. But I could see some things that were, okay, we could work with this. And
Yeah.
then as things progressed, it got less and less and less and less. And now I'll be invited to a wedding or something. I go back, I'm like, what is this?
Uh,
And so it's sad that, the Tridentine form of the Mass, beautiful, we could work with that. And now that suppressing it more and more, it's like we're getting farther and farther apart, and the whole ethos of worship is so different. It's just not the same. We're not approaching God the same way, and it's really tragic because if they listen to all of the young people in their church, that's what they want. I joke with the local bishop here, kind of flippantly, but what are they going to do? Fire me? But I told him, I said, if you guys did the Latin Mass in English, you guys would clean up.
I've told them that.
Yeah, but they don't want to hear it.
Father, you're not the only one. That I am grateful for the TLM communities that I did attend, because I think, because I grew up in the folk mass Novus Ordo of the
Yeah,
1970s. If I would have gone from that to Orthodox liturgy, it would have been a big shock.
sure.
But going from the traditional Latin mass, which
Yeah,
runs an hour and 15 minutes and it's much more reverent, going from that to the Russian Orthodox liturgy, you know
yeah,
what? It didn't feel real strange. I mean, the language is different, of course. It's Latin and Slavonic, but I think you say it in the vernacular.
yeah. I
But
mean, I
the
do
form,
liturgy mostly in English, but
yeah, I'm
I'll do
sorry,
a
Father,
litany.
but the form felt
Sure,
familiar.
sure. I do liturgy mostly in English, but I'll do a litany in Slavonic or litany in Greek just because I have some people from Russia, Ukraine. I have Greeks, just to kind of make them feel welcome. But again, the context of worship should be not just me worshiping, but the family worshiping. And I think that's the difference. It's not like it's not just this thing we just an empty ritual we just get through. It's something we offer to God. And for me, like I said, my greatest joy is my family participates in that. That I
Awesome.
have my boys on both sides of me. I can hear my daughter's voice from the choir. It's part of my ministry is them with me in that, and it's such a comfort.
It's beautiful to see too, like I said on your Facebook account. One thing I wanted to, I've been talking to you for a while, Father. One thing that you mentioned a few times, and I wasn't going to talk to you about, I hadn't planned, but it's been a focus of a lot of my writing and a lot of the, the sort of writing projects that I've done, and that is fatherhood. You mentioned your own father several times,
Yeah,
and one of the points I tried to make in my writing and in my book is it a good, and I was talking within the Roman Catholic context at the time, a good father would have made a good father, a biological father. And I think that good priests have good fathers because the fatherhood has been modeled to them
yeah,
by their father. So if they don't know how to be a father, they can't be a father.
right. Yeah, and that's. I mean, I joke. I said my father does not walk on water, but he's just a degree below it in my eyes. I mean, I've had, my father is a good man. He's a just man. He's a charitable man. I mean, he's not perfect, obviously, but he definitely gave me an image of what fatherhood should be that I try to model to my boys and my daughter now.
Wow.
And then part of it is, how I, kind of function as a father to my parish. Um, but uh, but same thing with spiritual fatherhood. I've had some great mentors as priests that showed me how to be a father in a spiritual sense. Like I said, those oblates of St. Francis de Sales when I was in high school were just phenomenal. How good they were, especially when I was struggling with something in my own parish. They didn't try to poach me to become Catholic. They just listened to my issues and gave me perspective and respected my faith as an Orthodox Christian. And so I'm eternally grateful to them for that. And so, and I've had good spiritual fathers that have been, you know, helpful and challenging and, uh, called me to account for certain things and, and just kind of gave me an understanding of what it meant to be a father. And, to support me when I needed support, to, kind of chastise me when I needed to be chastised, but always in the context of love. I was never afraid of them. I was never afraid of like, I'll disappoint them or something. I always felt safe being able to tell them, what I was struggling with or what I'd done wrong, or ask for advice if I didn't know about something. And then that's critical. We live in a world right now where everyone is afraid of everybody else and their opinions, and and we all put up these false identities because we're afraid of they'll see the real me. And the beauty of orthodoxy, especially in confession, is you don't give anybody else a sin. You're talking about your own self. One of my spiritual fathers, he was a monk at St. Tikhon's, an archimandrite, so a high-ranking monk. He would confession is usually done very formally with a gospel and a cross. You kneel, and he stands next to you with a stole in his head. Well, he was a little bit infirm, and so I would come to his cell. He would sit in his chair. I would sit on the couch across from him. He'd look at me. I look at him. There was no hiding. I couldn't, he just, we talk. And that was such a cleansing experience as a confessing to him, because he would talk to me as as a son, and kind of encourage me, or kind of correct me or whatever. And so those experiences then modeled how I would do it with my people, and try to be the same thing, offer grace to people when they fall, hold the line when it needs to be held, hold people accountable.
Exactly.
When I was first ordained, I was always afraid of offending somebody. It's like, oh, if I offend them, they'll leave the church. At this point now in my ministry, there's the door. You're welcome to use it. If this offends you, don't be mad at me. Be mad at Christ, because it's his truth. I'm just here to proclaim it. It's not my opinion. I don't have any opinions.
Father, that's a good father.
Well, I mean, obviously, this is not mine, right? The priesthood is not mine. It's Christ. He shares with me. And so my job is to proclaim the truth. And I saw something the other day I liked. It said it's hard to be the salt of the earth when we sugarcoat everything, right?
Exactly.
I've had people leave my parish because of my stances on certain things, and it wasn't because I was being a hardliner or anything. I just preached the gospel.
Exactly.
I can't change the gospel because I don't like something. It is what it is. And I think if we're all honest, we struggle with the gospel too, because it deals with our own heart. We're trying to wrestle with these kind of things, but that's okay. That's what it's for. It's the double-edged sword that cuts to the heart and drains the sinews and the bones. That's what it's about. It gets in there. But my job as priest and father is to tell people the truth. And if I tell people they want to hear, well, we'll become Episcopalians or something, because that's what I just saw that the other day. I was kind of sad that they did a survey of what people thought about moral and contemporary issues, and the church theology was then reflecting the people's opinion.
Yep.
That's not church, right? That's something completely foreign to the church. The church was always the conscience of the world, saying, "Thou shalt not." Not a good idea. It makes me nervous when I see bishops taking pictures with the president of the Oval Office and that kind of thing. We're not supposed to be buddy with government. We're supposed to hold the government accountable. We're supposed to be the ones that say, this is not right, this is not good. And not that we're trying to look for fights, but we hold the line and not be tempted by prestige or honor or whatever else. I've had people that have had difficulties and want to give big donations. Okay, you can give a donation, but I'm not changing my opinion on something. I'm not for sale. As if Christ isn't going to bless his church if you're not part of it. I tell people all the time, it's his church, not mine. And if in 2,000 years we haven't messed it up yet, he's got his. It's the one proof I say of the efficacy of the church.
Yeah.
We haven't messed it up in 2,000 years enough for it to collapse, because the Holy Spirit is proof that it's still alive and working well. And we've done a doozy of a job throughout the centuries with heretics and things and corruption, whatever else. But the church continues despite my failings and my efforts that don't hold up all the time.
Yeah. I knew you were based, Father, but yeah, this confirmed it. But based is like, you just don't care. You just say what is the truth and let it, let the cards fall where they may.
Well, I think
you're not worried about you're not worried about your popularity.
Well, I mean, because obviously I can look great in front of people and then be condemned before the throne of Christ. Like I don't, if I'm not in, like we had the new calendar, the beheading of John the Baptist was this past Monday. And I preached about this. I said, when John, the whole world at that time knew that Herod and Herodias' relationship was wrong. They all knew it, but no one dared say anything but John. And there's so many things in our world today that we all know it's wrong, but
Yeah.
no one dares say anything against it because we're afraid of the figurative Herods of our time.
Yeah.
Um, and when he was languishing in that prison for a year before he was beheaded, how lonely that must have been, by himself, feeling like, I'm saying the right thing, and here I am alone in this prison. But yet, in most Orthodox icons of the deicists, he's always standing next to Christ and having the Mother of God there. That now in eternity, he's always in that company. That in this life we might be alone, we might be ostracized, but in the world to come, we'll be in the company of the saints. And this is fleeting, that is eternal. So which one do we work for?
Yeah, this is really important because what I've seen the trajectory in, especially in the United States, but in the West, in let's say fatherhood, where it's been very hands off. What started as kind of like latchkey kids and became like free range kids. And I don't want to baptize my child because later they can make their own decisions, and then they don't get baptized. But that kind of attitude, like you said earlier, Father, has I think it's down. The priesthood has been kind of downstream from that
Yeah.
in many instances because people that later have a vocation become a priest. That's the kind of family they were raised in. And then I particularly seen it in Catholicism, where the priest doesn't want to, doesn't want to say anything, doesn't want to offer an admonition in charity to people. And I experienced that over and over again
That's
in the
our
priest,
job.
where I was longing for someone, even when I wasn't subconsciously, and I wrote about this in my book, even subconsciously, when I went to a priest sometimes, I was like hoping that he would say, "You really need to change your life." But
Right.
but they didn't. They kind of said, "Well, you're doing your best," and I wasn't doing my best.
Right. Because we want to be loved by people, right? Who doesn't want to be liked, right?
Yeah,
And that's a temptation for priests too. We want people to like us.
exactly.
What
And
I
you don't
found,
want them to stop donating as well. You don't want to lose a parishioner.
but I think that goes back to the whole idea of where we put our trust, right? Right now we're starting another parish in Gettysburg, a mission parish, and three of my families are going to start that parish. So three families, we have a mortgage still, we're paying off our building, three families, and that could be a hit. But I see this like a tithe. The more you give to God, the more He gives back to you. If these three families are given to this mission to start another community, God's going to bless us with it. I'm not worried about money in that sense because it's God's church. He's going to take care of it. And He always does. And I think that the less we focus on, if I don't do this right, it's not going to happen. More trusting on the Lord will do what He needs to do because it's His church. And I think when we're afraid of losing a parishioner because of their donation, you don't think God's going to take care of that because you do the right thing? I mean, uh, I've kind of, and I think every priest has this temptation. Early on in my ministry, I was, I was there like, oh, I can't offend somebody because they might leave. Now it's like, leave. I've had people that have told me that, well, if that's how you feel, then we're going to leave. And I showed them where the door was, and they said, God bless you. And because my job is not to be a caretaker for people and everything they want, and everything else. My job is to proclaim the gospel. Um, and if you want that, come. If you don't, go away, go somewhere else. You'd be much happier as a kind of a liberal Episcopalian or something. But don't try to make my or his church that I'm responsible for in this place and time to conform with what you want just because you want it. It's just the opposite. The church tells us how we're to conform, how we're to submit to the will of God. And we have to work that out through these difficult things, the message of the gospel, which is hard. But at the same time, easy to carry if we get our our personal stuff out of the way. And so I think that there's been a blessing because of it. With there's so many things that we can hold the line that somebody's got to hold the line. And I think that's my job as a priest. That, I've told people before, when somebody tried to bring some of the stuff into the parish a couple of years ago, they wanted to, have some kind of an agenda, and that's when I told them pretty much, this isn't the place for you. As a priest, I'm the shepherd, but the shepherd also is to identify the wolves and protect his people. And I told people right from the pulpit, I said, if you are going to bring this kind of stuff into this parish, you have to get through me first. Wow. I said, because we'll have none of that here. Wow. And I drew the line in the sand and said, this is what it is. And I think that more people were respectful of me for that than were critical of it.
This is, I want to let you go, Father. But I want to end with this, because I think I usually at the end of my podcast, I try to thread the needle all the way around. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. But one of the things that I've really come to appreciate in the married priesthood and Orthodoxy is that you do have experience within a family. Because this is just a funny little anecdote, but I was at it's not the baby was baptized the day before, and then that day they had the presentation, I guess, of the baby, and he received his first communion. And when Father picked up that baby and held that baby, I'm like, that's a man that's held a baby before. He knows how to do it. There's nothing awkward about it.
Yeah.
And one of the problems I did have in the Catholic Church is that with some of the priests, that some of the things that priests would say to me, and I was like, wow, I would say, if you had a son, would you say that to your son?
Right.
And my dad did not. All credit to my dad, may he rest in peace, is that me and him had a very rocky relationship throughout my life. But when, like you said, when the rubber hit the road, he was the one that told me, you need to clean up your life when nobody else, would. And I just think that in the married priesthood, I think a priest has more experience with what it's like to tell the truth, because a good father tells the truth. And my dad did that for me, because he just knew I wasn't a spiritual son. I was his biological son. So I think a lot of married priests can carry that over.
Sure.
Not that there's more care and compassion, but I think they understand the urgency of some situations.
Well, there's experience. There's
exactly.
I always talk about theory and experience. I can read all about this, but until I actually do it and experience it, it's a whole other story. And that's why in the Orthodox Church, it's not just learning about God, it's coming into contact with him directly. And we experience God himself through his divine energies. That's how we know him personally, not just because we read it somewhere. And so it's not just about reading a manual and applying it somewhere or using canon law as some kind of weapon, but using the experience of family life and raising families and children and guiding them and correcting them and mentoring them. That it's my job to do that with all the people in my parish, and that's why you pray for your priest all the more, that he can do that faithfully and effectively, despite all the other challenges and all the things that we have to work on. With my own self, I have to do my own stuff I'm dealing with, right? As a human, as a Christian, let alone the stuff I'm working out with my marriage and my children, and then my parish, and then it's hard stuff. But I'll share with you one story that I love about that just happened recently. A parishioner of mine had a friend who was sick. He had congestive heart failure, and he was in the hospital dying. And he said, "Would you go and visit him?" I said, "Well, sure, if he knows I'm coming." He wasn't Orthodox. I don't think he was really practicing anything. I said, if he's okay with me coming, I'm happy to go. And it was during COVID times, so mask and everything else. So I walk in looking like Darth Vader with my cassock and my black mask. So I'm like, how are you going to know who I am? So I come to the door and I greet him, and we've met each other once before. And so, he's happy to see you. Please come in. And I said, I don't know you well. Tell me your story. While we're in this hospital, it was 9 o'clock at night, last minute kind of thing. I ran over to the hospital. and he's breathing very heavily because it's congestive heart failure.
Mm.
And he said, "Well, I was orphaned as a small child and was taken in by a foster family. And the father pulled me aside at 6 years old and said, 'Just so we're clear, you're not my son, and I'll never love you.'"
Whoa.
Strike one. Um, and then when he was 13 years old, he was starting to have same-sex attraction, that kind of thing. He went to the Catholic priest and said, "Here's what I'm dealing with." And the priest says, "Get the hell out of here."
Hmm.
And so he told me, he says, "I'm not going to call you father. I'm going to call you Mister." Okay, fine. Call me whatever you want. I don't care. And so, no wonder he had an aversion to calling people father, right? Because of the fathers he had experienced in his life.
Yeah.
So a couple weeks went by. He kind of rebounded a little bit, came home. I got a letter in the mail addressed to Father Timothy Hojnicki, thanking me for coming, dear Father, right? Well, just 2 weeks ago, I got a call. He was on his deathbed, dying. Went to the house. He was, you could tell all the signs of being ready to die. He was breathing heavily. Extremities started getting kind of blue. The body's, kind of converging on what it needs to do to function. And I had a private moment. I just said, whatever, because his whole life was apart from God, the church, and lived God knows however else, not good. I said,
Yeah.
whatever happened in your life, whatever reason it happened, whoever's fault it was, whatever, this is the time to ask God for his mercy, his forgiveness, forgive everyone, that priest, your stepfather, whoever, just let it all go and trust in the mercy of God. And then, I wasn't Orthodox, so I didn't really do anything, didn't give him communion or anything because I couldn't, but just prayed with him and, asked him to prepare himself as best he could. I got home, and by the time I got home, I got a phone call he died.
Mm.
And so I buried him, not from the
Wow.
church, not from the funeral home. I went to the cemetery, met four people and him in the cemetery. That was it. And there's things we can do as an Orthodox priest that bury people who are not Orthodox. I can bury anybody. It's not the same rite we do as an Orthodox Christian in the church. It's something special, just some psalms, and really, there's not really much to it. But I think that showing a little bit of kindness and grace to someone who had a difficult life, a difficult situation, goes a long way. But that role as father can make or break someone. And I pray God's mercy on that stepfather and that priest who fumbled their responsibility or just abdicated it completely. That this person's life could have been completely different if there was an interaction. I have a personal belief. This is not official Orthodox theology, so don't hold it to me. But at the judgment seat of Christ, there'll be many people who get a pass at the judgment seat of Christ because of the people they encounter in their life that's called themselves Christian. That someone who declared themselves an avowed atheist is because they met ugly Christians and said, "I want nothing to do with this." And our Lord's going to say, "You get a pass on that one. That had nothing to do with my church." Those people, all the more, will be more accountable. St. Paul quoting Isaiah, because of me, because of you, my name is cursed among the nations, right? And so, I pray for the repose of this person, that God would have mercy on him, given into consideration the life he led and the difficulty he had to deal with, and the bad advice and direction he was given that put him in this direction. Not that he's without his own personal, responsibility of that, but these father figures didn't help at all. And so, all
And
the
he, and
more,
and he needed one. Yeah.
sure, and all the more, that's reminds me of my job as father. And so, I marvel at the mercy of God that in the last months and days of his life, I could be a father figure. Now he was in his 70s, so I'm only in my 40s. So I mean, the roles were reversed, but I could
Yeah.
still be father to him in that sense and guide him, hopefully, to have some sense of repentance before the throne of God when he met him face to face. So yeah,
On I didn't want to get into this topic real quick, but on that subject, the pendulum has swung way too far because I think I don't know about in Orthodoxy because it's not my experience, but in Roman Catholicism, I would say in the Boomer generation, there was a lot of condemnation um, leveled at people and not much charity. But with me, my generation, it's swung way so far over that it's just approbation, which is
right.
which is what I received. And again, a good father knows how to take a middle road, to be charitable, to be kind, to be Christ-like, but to not enable. And that's what's
That's it.
happened.
Yeah. And everything starts with law, right? I mean, in the Old Testament, they're given law, right? And the Israelites got so caught up in that whole thing that Christ and St. Paul is saying, wait a minute, let me, the law was the beginning, the foundation, but then we have to go higher than that. And so the same thing goes with the church. We have law, right? We have, thou shalt nots, right? But at the same time, we have to take into consideration the human person. And the Orthodox understanding of canon law, it's never to be understood legalistically. Law is how it's supposed to be. And then how do we apply this to the person now? And that's the job of the priest or the bishop to kind of navigate that. Here's a canon that we established back in the 4th century. How do you apply that to this situation? Because it's not a one size fits all, but it's not used as a weapon. It's always used to be therapeutic as a healing thing. Just like you have to cut someone in surgery to make them better, you have to wound them to make them better. The same thing goes with this kind of stuff. You have to use the disciplines of the church that might be painful, but ultimately bring about healing, not use as punitive and kind of use them as a weapon to smack people upside the head. Now you submit. That doesn't work.
No, no, and not to canonize my own biological father, but looking back, I hated him at the time. But looking back, he really did the right thing, because he said, "I love you. You'll always be my son. You're always welcome. But you can't be bringing this stuff home," which is what I was doing. And so he said, "Clean up your life," and that's what I did. And
I think that every time you go to church, you light a candle for him, and pray to God for the repose of his soul, and thank him, right? That he didn't give up on you.
no, he didn't. God bless him. And it's one of the reasons why I'm alive. And my dad had an interesting upbringing. He came from a little town in Sicily. It's a weird, it'd make a good dissertation for somebody's doctorate in like theology, or even sociology. But it was a funny little town where there was a Uniate church, and then there was also a Roman Catholic church, and he kind of went back and forth. And he had family members in both. He had celibate priests and in his family, but also married Uniate priests. So I think he would be happy with the path that my faith journey has taken. So I'm at peace. So
I like to tell everybody, if anyone's found favor with God, they're Orthodox now, right? There's no Catholics or Protestants or whatever in heaven. When they come to heaven, they know what the truth is now. Everyone's Orthodox at that point if they accept it. It's not just, you can't be, someone that didn't believe in Christ in heaven. You see him, you acknowledge, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. You're in, and so if he's accepted that and understands that, he knows your choice. He knows what the goodness you're in, and he's part of that bliss, if the Lord has found favor with him.
Yeah. And a number of Roman Catholics, I mean, I just dealt with it today and over the weekend on social media. A lot of Roman Catholics believe that Orthodox are apostates or schismatics. So part of the reason I want to talk to priests, and I've talked to other priests as well, is that, hey, if you're interested in Orthodoxy, check it out.
I think we use these kind of words, when people are self-conscious, to put them out to kind of, you're a schismatic, you're apostate. Okay, what does that mean?
Right? I don't know.
What are we apostatizing about?
I don't know.
What have we removed ourselves from? If there were 5 patriarchates, now there's 4. Who left who? But those arguments can only be had when people are willing to listen.
I don't know, and that's when my journey to Orthodoxy began, and thank God it sort of started at St. Tikhon's and at the cathedral in San Francisco, where St. John Maximovich is reposed, and Father Seraphim Rose, of course, was there. So it was just being curious. That's where it started.
So. God will use anything.
Yes. Thank you, Father. Thank you so much. God bless you, Father, for spending so much time with me.
Sure.
I really appreciate it. God bless you. Could you offer a blessing for me and perhaps the people listening.
Sure.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and his love for mankind, always, now, and forever, into the ages of ages. Amen.
Amen. Awesome. Thank you, Father.
All right, Joseph, take care. God bless you.